Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a variety of little nano tanks that I have. As you know, I've been doing updates on all my tanks, and if you've missed it, I've done the flexes, I've done the specs, I've done the old tanks, my oldest tanks, and now I'm going into some of the oddball tanks. I've got the Steampunk tank, I got the face tank, I've got the 20 long with all the weirdness going on in there. And I've got a little tiny 3-gallon tank I'm embarrassed of. That's all coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec. Now, I have a lot of these kind of odd nanos, and I wasn't sure how to categorize them. So, but all of these have one thing in common, or well, most of these have one thing in common, and that's that I've given them that little extra bit of DIY. They're all things where I've kind of like altered stuff a little bit, and with the exception of one tank that I just don't know where else to throw it, all these tanks have been pretty heavily altered by me. Luckily, most of these tanks, the alterations that I've made have been pretty much parts of playlists. I've got playlists for most of the different versions of what the 20-gallon were. I definitely have a playlist for the Steampunk tank and all the journey that was. So as you're watching this, if you're especially if you're new and you're curious how I actually made this, be sure to check out those playlists. You can skip around and find I pretty much recorded everything, so you should find out what you need to know. You can also ask questions. Don't be shy. I don't always answer right away, but I try to once a week at least go through all my comments and see if there are any pressing questions that I know the answers to. So on all these tanks, I've recently done updates. So I've recently gone through and rescaped them or reimagined them in some way. So this update will be kind of a good catch-up on a bunch of videos that I made this year. So let's start with the Steampunk tank since I'm right here. And where I last left off with that, I changed the interior around, which has been great. I added coolie loaches, which has been amazing. I really love the coolie loaches in here, I gotta say. I wish this was a 20-gallon, because I'd like to add, handfuls of those things. And really, I'd like, even for the 4 or 5 that are in here, I'd like it to be a little bit bigger tank. But the filtration seems to be pretty amazing. It's actually a really great filter. And they really seem to enjoy themselves. And I think it's funny. I get comments all the time, or I've had a few comments. And I say, well, how do you know the fish has enjoyed itself? Do you speak fish? Blah, blah, blah. But with coolie loaches, they will hide if they feel threatened at all. And they'll just run for cover. So if you see them out, kind of laying around, I've seen them coiled around the Anubias branches. I've seen them just kind of hanging out just outside of tunnels and stuff, or poking their head out for rocks. I see them running around all the time while I'm sitting here outside of the aquarium looking at them. So I think that they feel extremely comfortable. This is a really optimal thing because we're kind of getting that peek hole view. They like their privacy. There's lots of opportunities for privacy in here. So that's an interesting observation. Maybe you got shy fish that if all you've got to look through is one porthole, maybe you don't see them everywhere in the tank. Sometimes it's not great. I've got one so I can see long ways, and with a flashlight I can see all the way back there. But what's really neat is looking from this point of view on the side, it kind of does that disappearing thing, so they kind of disappear into the darkness in the back, and I think that's really cool. I mean, even just looking over my shoulder now, I see one of them just sitting there looking at me. Oh, there's 2. Like all fish, they do seem to know when you have a camera on them, and they want to run and hide, or maybe because I got too close. They are such groovy little fish. Very photogenic, very fun to own. It is possible for them to crawl up into this filter here on the top. I haven't found one up there. I've kind of gently nudged the plants around and stuff and to try to see. If they did get locked up there, of all the fish that are around, I would say that they'd have the best chance of getting back out. It's basically, there's just a little tunnel where the water pours out. They could just crawl right up that when the water's up high enough and swim around in there or go back either way. What's nice is if they did get trapped in there, I mean, there's no chance of the water level ever dropping all the way. I mean, the pump would have to be turned off, and it'd have to be sitting long enough for it to evaporate, that much water under a canopy. So I think they'd be pretty safe, even if they did manage to climb up into the filter. Now, when I did the update videos for this tank, I actually did 2 videos. I did one for the Wabikusa side and one for underneath. We've talked about that. Now, the Wabikusa, the plan to add the tissue-cultured Anubias plants worked perfectly. In fact, the big surprise thriver inside this environment is the cardinal plant. What's great, too, is if the Anubias are in shade, they don't seem to mind too much. In fact, I've got it in front of the window, and this window does get a little bit of light in the afternoon. So hopefully they're getting some benefit. I'm not sure if this is UV coated or maybe the windows are, but hopefully they're getting some benefit from some of the natural sunlight. It actually helps down inside here too, because this has just got a little waterproof light that's not very good. But there is the open plastic at the top to kind of give it a little bit more illumination down into the tank, and having that window there really helps. Yeah, so not too much more to say on that. The plants are doing terrific. So the plants always do well for me or the Anubias. I can get them if I can kind of get them to grow, and then they don't mind if they get a little bit too little light. Sometimes I even find a lot of plants thrive in kind of the shade. Like they get some light, but it's definitely muted. And that's sort of counterintuitive because most of the plants I know, they need a definitely good source of light to grow. Now they get a decent amount of light from this little lamp here and the window, of course, but these have really done well in this sort of terrarium/paludarium setting. So the next tank I'd like to tell you about is my 20-gallon long. I think this is probably my most recent rescape. I think the video is called Flipping the Lawn when I finally tore the thing apart. This tank's been a little bit up and down, which is odd because I basically left most of the filtration intact since it had the canister filter underneath, and of course the matin filter, which I cleaned really thoroughly, but I didn't certainly didn't do anything to try to kill off the bacteria. It ended up having a bit of an ammonia spike, and it took a little bit longer to add fish than I would have liked. That sort of triggered some algae issues that I had, and I ended up trimming back some of the buse plants. I've got some buse plants that seem to be doing okay still, and seem to be doing all right. They tend to be real sensitive to ammonia. Buse plants must be a little bit more sensitive to ammonia than I would have thought. And at least that's my observation. And there's dozens and dozens of species. And there's lots of plants that don't like ammonia. Nothing likes ammonia. But I have seen some plants seem to be unaffected and other plants just die. But everything's been pretty much okay for a while now. So when I got back from Aquashella, I had brought home some beneficial bacteria that I actually got from the Fritz booth. And I tried it out on the tank, added copious amounts in there, and tested it. The water seemed pretty good after that. After maybe a day or two, I kind of kept testing and going back to kind of see how it was doing. Now, of course, the tank's mostly empty, so it's kind of hard to test. And I wish it was in another room with a really big tank, like if I'd had it in the other room with a 56-gallon, I could have done the same thing I did downstairs. I suppose I could have put it in a bucket and done it that way anyway, but that'd be a pain in the butt. So anyway, it tested okay. I got it to where ammonia was unmeasurable, but I wasn't getting really anything else. It was pretty sterile. So I immediately added some Endler's live bearers. Endlers have been my little soldiers, my little astronauts, my little help me get the tank going buddies for quite a while. I've got a lot of them, pretty much as many as I want. They breed like crazy. I'll throw young ones in that don't generate a lot of waste and just let them kind of grow up a little bit. Or I'll throw a male and a female in there, and inevitably, I'll have a bunch of babies. And after a couple of weeks of being really stable, I decided to add some rosy loaches. Rosy loaches are very small little loaches. They have the classic loach shape, with kind of the pointy nose and some barbels. I think they have barbels. I mean, they're so small, so small. The males are bright red. The females have kind of the silvery, speckly pattern. That's the technical term. Silvery, speckly. I think it says that in the field guide. What's crazy is even before I added any fish, as I was testing it and looking around and doing just water changes in there, I noticed a tiny little baby Coreodorus, like one of those dwarf Coreodorus that were in there before. They'd laid an egg on something, presumably, and it lived. So I could not catch it, unfortunately. It disappeared behind the wood and stuff in there, and I wasn't going to tear the aquarium apart to find him, but yeah, there's a little baby Coreod cat from the last time it was a tank. Watch that video flipping the lawn and imagine something surviving what I did in there. It's crazy. In all likelihood, it must have been on one of the plants that made it back into the aquarium. That's my best guess. I guess it could have been on the glass, but boy, if that's the case, the eggs are pretty tough. So as far as the lawn goes, that's worked pretty well. I could already see it growing back towards the front. It's a really interesting clump of plants, right? Because it's Monte Carlo mostly. But if you remember from the original video that I made of this thing, which is called Into the Woods, I'd had all these trees, and all those trees were covered in like different kinds of moss. H2O Plants sent me probably like 16 kinds of moss, and I put them all through the trees. And of course it looked beautiful for 5-6 months, and then I had to trim it. So some of the moss died immediately, some of the moss flourished, and so what I was doing is I'd trim parts of it and then I'd kind of move it around. But when you trim moss, I mean, any segment of it that falls away just like keeps growing from wherever it lands. And it's not like I'm vacuuming it out as I trim. So I ended up with little strands of all these different kinds of moss, like all over the Monte Carlo. And it's made it this weird conglomeration of moss and Monte Carlo. And they grow together. So as this thing grows, and you can see little tendrils of the Monte Carlo creeping their way out. They're making their way towards the empty spaces. And they'll eventually engulf everything. When I originally set this up, I'd put one of those little 3-tube ceramic things that they sell for like shrimp to hide in. That's still in there. It was enveloped by the Monte Carlo and the moss and all the stuff. It's like Akira up in there. Kaneda! Tatsuo! But at least I know that the plants are growing really well. I think it'll be a fun little environment for some really small fish. I'm super tempted to like just pick some of the same fish I have downstairs that I know have done really well. I've heard that sometimes you can get the rosy barbs to breed if they're kept in just the right conditions. So I'm thinking about maybe I've got 1 male and 2 females, and I was thinking about getting a few more females, maybe a couple more males, and really building up a big school of them in there, and then add maybe a couple of other things. I really like keeping them in the 16-gallon downstairs. Is where I have probably 5 or 6. Well, gosh, there might be more. There's at least 5 or 6 in the 16-gallon downstairs. They get along super well with the Galaxy Rasboras. So I'd love to add some more Galaxy Rasboras, but man, I've put them in so many tanks already. I kind of like to maybe try something I haven't normally kept. So I'll have to think on that a little bit more. Maybe a different species of the pygmy Coreodorus. That would be kind of neat. Man, I would really love for those to breed. I'd like to next year, if I can, it'd be cool to have try to figure out some scheme where I could breed those little pygmy Coreodorus. Apparently they don't mind the water so much, so maybe shrimp are eating the eggs, or snails are eating the eggs, or they are eating the eggs. I have to think on that a little bit more. It's funny, I've bred a whole lot of fish just by like trimming plants from one tank and putting them in another. And right now, even when I trim moss out of a lot of my tanks, I'll throw it in the sump at the bottom of my 210 just to see if any babies pop out after a couple of days. The 20-gallon, of course, is a work in progress, but progress is going good, and I'm looking forward to adding lots of cool little fishes in there. All right, so moving on down, let's see. What kind of quippy face name did I make up for the video? In this year's video called Refaced, I redid the face tank a little bit. Basically, with the face tank, it was one of those same old stories. I'll put a number of different plants in. One will do super, super well, and I'll keep it and just remove anything that gets in its way. I had intended this to be another Monte Carlo carpet because Monte Carlo is kind of easy to grow. Maybe a little bit of crypt parv if I could get it to grow. But when I'd started getting the H2O plant subscriptions, I'd gotten a number of different plants, and I was just throwing plants in all kinds of situations and all kinds of plants I'd never had before. One was this real narrow leaf sword plant. It had been doing really, really well. It was very aggressive inside the face tank, and I'd actually taken clippings from runners, and I started planting them in other places. The only other one where it took off was in the spec 16 gallon, and it started to kind of really find its home there. So it took away a lot, or pretty much all of the hardscape in the face tank. The face itself is attached to the glass in the back, so there's nothing impeding the ground cover there. Because of the way this sword plant grows, which is, it's kind of like grass, but maybe a little bit thicker leaves, you know. But it does a much better job of kind of obscuring, but not obscuring the face in the tank in the back, which is really interesting, kind of peeping through the grass. Before I'd done a similar effect with the rocks, and it was kind of neat because the face sort of matched the rocks. Over the years, the paint has worn down a bit, so I'm starting to see more of the what's under the top layer. And it doesn't look bad or anything, but it was looking less and less like the rocks that I had included in there. The algae that was starting to cover them was kind of messing with it too. Plus, too much hardscape really, like, it's taken away from the volume of water in the tank, making a small tank even smaller. So I opted to pull out all the rocks, and I've planted that sword plant where it can kind of move around. This is the one tank where I've had a very successful crypt parv carpet. So much so that I ripped out any Monte Carlo that was in that tank just so it wouldn't take over my little crypt parv carpet. Now, it's just one corner, but I'm still calling it a success. It's the thickest, cleanest little carpet of that stuff I've ever had. And that kind of goes back to that, like, plants in a shadow. It pretty much happened under the shadow of that rock. I mean, it had a light up above it, but that rock, if I look down from where the light was, I mean, there's a rock blocking a lot of that light. So it kind of grew up in the shade and whatever ambient light was around in the room. Yeah, I'm not sure if that means anything at all, but that's definitely something to note. And that'll be something I experiment with in the future. I'll plant them in the dark. Why didn't I think of that? I've got no little buddy for this tank. I found a betta at the store the other day, and I don't know, I really like the look of it, and I decided to bring him home. This tank very frequently is covered in frog bit. I use frog bit as kind of an artificial lid for this stuff. It does eventually get so thick that I need to pull it out versus, I'm worried that it'll kill the plants inside, especially the sword plant. I do tend to let it get pretty thick. The shrimp that are in the tank love it. And the shrimp and the betta don't seem to be fighting at all. I haven't seen it chasing any of them, and I still see them come out when I go to feed. For some reason, frogbit grows really, really well in that tank. So I let it cover the tank. Usually I let that go until a water change, maybe 2 water changes. It'll be looking pretty dim in there. The shrimp really, really like it, so I don't pull it out straight away. I give it a little bit of time. And then I pull it all out, or not all of it. I'll pull most of it out, and then I'll let it grow back. As far as I can tell, there hasn't been any negative impact from the plants inside. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's helping me keep it mostly algae free. It's a fun little tank, and a lot of people ask me what kind of tank it is. If it was the old school Fluval Flora. I've done a couple of Fluval Flora videos in the past for the original kit. Now, this particular tank I got in a contest at the Aquatic Experience. I went up there for an aquascaping contest, and I tried to set up some version of this tank up there. Yeah, I thought it looked pretty neat, but it was nowhere on the scale of some of these other people. Their plants were really, really on point. I really should have had fresher plants and even more plants. So that's an interesting video. It's called Let's Face It, and you can catch that in my archives as well. Now, the last tank I want to talk about is this little 3-gallon Nano. I'd had a bunch of leftovers when I did the 16-gallon downstairs, and I wanted to use my leftover ADA products to do like a tiny ADA product tank. So I've got the power sand and the aquasolium, and I put a little bit too much in there. I think I put way too much substrate in there, first of all. And the tank kind of went up and down. It never ended up having anything alive in it. Eventually, it got to where I tested it for a while, and I just decided to let it sit. Just kind of let it sit and see what happens. It did okay for a long time, but then eventually it just got really covered in algae. This tank then kind of became my experiment tank. So it was like, well, what if I did a really severe, like, hydrogen peroxide treatment, for example? So I doused it in hydrogen peroxide, and it just kind of, and I picked, physically picked some of the algae off, did a water, heavy water change, just put hydrogen peroxide all over. Everything was fizzling and stuff. And then I filled it back up and just kind of looked to see what happens. It's interesting with the peroxide, it turns everything pink, or it turns all the algae pink, and it just kind of oxidizes it and kills it pretty much on the spot. Now, I'm not sure if I'd let it go too long, like the algae had been on there too long, or the peroxide was too severe, but I had a lot of dieback on the Anubias that was in there. It's not completely dead. I see a few leaves on there, and it looks like it might be okay. I kind of went in there for a trim and cleaned it up. And oddly enough, the buse that is in there seems to be just fine too, although it's never done super well. It doesn't seem like it had the dieback that the other plant did. That tank remains, but it's mainly just kind of an experiment tank. I'm not looking to put anything in there. Not right now. Really, my biggest hope is that I can kind of recover the plants and kind of get everything growing really well, and use the cuttings from that to go into other aquariums. But whether or not that works out is a tale for a future video. Thanks for hanging out with me all through November. As you know, I've been giving away Marineland filters. I'm giving away 2 filters this week. And the winners are... Okay, we're all set to pick a winner. We're actually picking 2 winners this week. So here's the video, and here's the dark, cold robot hand of fate reaching out to pick a winner. Ooh, the Judas. I won already. Well, now you're like a prophet, I guess. How cool. Okay, and one more winner. If you're in the US, I'll be mailing you a filter. If not, then I'll pick again some other time. But I'm going to be contacting you. And also, Ed Weiser. I love the bloopers at the end of the video. I'm glad you like those, because I make a lot of them. I'm going to be pinning one of these 2 comments, whoever I find first, and I'll let you both know that you need to get in touch with me and let me know how to mail you a filter. Cool stuff. Thank you guys so much. Just look in the description if you need my email address. Let me know. I actually just got another package from Marineland the other day. It's some filter material. So it might be time to do another Aqua Shopper video. It's actually today, Black Friday, and I did not go shopping. Well, I've got some other stuff to show you, so maybe I'll do that next week. I do have an update for the 210 that I want to do with you guys, but I'm kind of I'm pushing it out a little bit further. I'll probably do it in December, a little bit midway through December. Thinking seriously about doing another kind of last aquascape of the year. I've got another tank over here, and I could easily get that set up. But that's all I got for you this week. Until next time, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec. Now, with the Black Dog, so as you're watching this, if you're real curious, if you're new, and you're, well, probably the easiest one. I don't know. They really seem to enjoy it. I've never thought of using the plants to do always. Rosy loaches are really, really cool, small roach. So that tank's been really interesting. Thanks for how. Everything's been okay for a while now. When I came back from the